Welcome to Murder Most Foul, a podcast devoted to exploring famous murder cases of our time. Some solved, some unsolved, but all fascinating and guaranteed to raise the hairs on the back of your neck. I'm your host, Jim Solanowski. Today's episode: a pitbull with lipstick. A pitbull with lipstick. That's how Cathy Terkanian has been described, due to her relentless quest to uncover the truth about her daughter, Aundria Bowman, who disappeared in 1989 after being placed for adoption years earlier. With the help of web sleuth Carl Koppelman and dedicated detectives from 2 states, Cathy discovers the truth about what happened to the little girl she named Alexis. And Cathy joins me now on Murder Most Foul. My guest today is Cathy Terkanian, who has a sad but amazing, gripping story. And it was the subject of a documentary that we're going to talk a little about also. But I wanted to get, it's a great documentary and everyone must see it. And it's called Into the Fire. And I believe now it's on Netflix. But welcome, Cathy.
Hi, how are you, Jim?
Very good. Thank you.
Good.
So what's amazing about this, it's a case. I call them a case, is it starts with something fairly personal to you, but simple, an adoption, giving up a child for adoption. And then there's thousands of those, and 90% of them, I hope, or 99, end up happily for at least for the child gets a good home. In this case, that was not the case. So we have the adoption. We have, and we'll talk each step. Then we have you being contacted years later by the adoption agency, wondering if you have seen the daughter that you named Alexis, that they can't find her. She's a runaway at that point. That draws you back into your daughter's life and obviously stirs up everything, and you absolutely want to help find her. And again, it's not a spoiler. She is not alive. She has been murdered. And then we get the rest of that and how you and several interesting people, we'll talk about Carl, very interesting people, get to the bottom of something that was a cold case. In the beginning, they weren't even going to say she was dead, just she ran away, and too bad. So let's go back, and again, I know it's personal. I watched but I love the title. Why don't you start with the title, which is covered in the documentary, sort of where it comes from, Into the Fire.
Okay. Well, when I met the producer of the documentary, his name is Ryan White. He has a company called Tripod. We all sat down on a Zoom call, myself, Charlize wasn't there. It was one of the people that is part of her production company. The woman who wrote the story, The Girl in the Picture, which you will find on the Abatis, that's what Charlize picked up on. That was the story she picked up on. Anyway, so we all sat down to talk about the documentary, and they just wanted to know how did this unfold? And I said it was like walking into a fire. And that's where he got it. And so, he took that and he played on it like you would in a documentary. I mean, that's a kind of a cryptic statement, right? So they went about making it, and, they didn't tell me anything about what they were going to call it. So when they named it that, Into the Fire, The Lost Daughter, I went, that's why you wanted to talk about that so much. Because he just wanted me to talk more and more about it. He triggered a memory in me that it took me a year or two to put together. I had been in a house fire, and I had been saved as a little child. Myself and my 3 siblings and my mother were pulled out of a second floor in a house fire. And so it might have come from that. I don't know. But it was, and also fire is transformative. I mean, you just don't walk into a fire and come out the same way you walked in. So I think that I in the back of my head remembered that experience, but also knew that, it was a transformative experience for me, this. And so Into the Fire just came out of my mouth.
That there is a scene, I believe, a couple of scenes maybe where you're like at a campfire, maybe. Do I remember that right?
We were sitting around a little, what do they call them? An outdoor fire pit.
The fire pit. Fire pit. Yeah, very evocative.
Yes. And we didn't have one. The producer brought it over. He set the scene up. So he wanted my husband and I to sit there in front of that fire and start a nice fire. And we camped all for 30 years. We've on and off camped. So he knew how to make a good fire. And we live in the Northeast, so we have a huge pile of wood. We just made it happen.
So let's go back. Tell us again, whatever you feel. This is your story. Whatever you want to talk about giving up Alexis for adoption.
Well, I was a teenager, and my mother was ill with cancer, and she had four, not small, but teenage kids at home, and she could not see me if she had died. I think what was in her mind that she was going to die, and I was going to take care of her kids. And she could not see me being able to handle an infant and 3 teenagers. So behind my back, she went to Catholic Charities and told Catholic Charities, this kid cannot have a kid. I have cancer. What do I do? And Catholic Charities said, tell her she's unable to raise that child, that there are people lined up around the corner, decent, good people who want to adopt an infant, and they will do it, but she has to do it right away. She can't think about it. This child still has to be an infant. And so they rushed me. They bullied me. They cajoled me. All the things. This is 1974, So there was a level of, saving face that my mother was also probably trying to achieve. And I don't know why. Why bother, But anyway, so she convinced me after, it took her several months, but she convinced me by the time Alexis was 9 months old that if I didn't give her up now, she wouldn't get a decent family and that I would ruin her life. Now, my mother's got cancer and the prognosis is very poor. I couldn't fight with her. And I had no place else to go. So I sort of, at 16, you can take anything from a traumatized 17-year-old. Let's just put it that way. And they bullied me and they cornered me and they took my daughter.
And you're married to your husband, Edward Terkanian, who you told me is Eddie, for quite a while, right?
I've been married to him since 91.
God bless. God bless.
Yeah.
I'm going on 39 years.
Are you?
My wife's trying to get rid of me, but it's not working. So ultimately you do settle because it's 30, I believe it was 30 years, and we'll talk, you can correct me if I'm wrong, 30 years when there's a knock on the door or a phone
21
call.
years. 21 years.
And my question to that is, first of all, how did they load? You wouldn't no reason to keep up with them, or maybe you did. How did they find you?
No, I was looking for her since 2000. As soon as the internet came out, well, I was doing it a little bit before then. Sure. I had to unravel a big bunch of convoluted lies and deception to figure out who had her last, who took custody of her in the sense of who was the social worker that handed her over to that monster. A couple of years of talking to Catholic Charities who would tell me nothing, who finally did tell me that Norfolk Human Services handled the adoption, and that I would have to talk to them to find anything out. Well, when I called them, they put me through a couple of years of just rigmarole, send them a non-identifying letter. It took me a while to figure that one out. And then finally, I just lost my cool, and I said, look, you take my phone number, and you take my name, and you take my address, and you give it to that kid if she comes walking through the door. They took that information that I told them to take, and they put it in the file. And then 2-3 years later, a policeman showed up at their door, at the social worker's door, with a letter that said there had been a Jane Doe found in Racine, Wisconsin, who they believe might be my daughter. So
Right.
I called my husband. I was down in Florida visiting with my family, and I called my husband up here in New England. He had the computer. Now, this was 2010. Social media is just getting going.
Yes.
So I said, and what the social worker did tell me was what state she went missing from. She wouldn't tell me Alexis's name. She wouldn't tell me who the parents, not parents, the monsters were.
The monsters.
She wouldn't tell me the name of the detective. The only thing she would tell me is she was missing from Michigan. So I called up my husband and said, look on the Michigan State uh, state trooper has a website
Mm-hmm.
called, well, it's a website, the missing people in
We're
Michigan.
missing. Yeah, sure.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so she was the first one on the list. I said, look for someone with the birthday 6/23/74. I had that. They didn't have to give me that. He found her in 15 minutes. She was the first one on the list.
Now, is that missing person's information saying this is who she is, this is her name
Right,
now?
right.
Did it then, that's probably still private, they didn't say missing from Mr. and Mrs. X's
No,
house?
no.
Just
They
the
just
state.
said her name. Right.
Right.
They said the town she went missing from, what she was last seen wearing, I think, her description. She called herself Alexis, and that's the name I gave her.
Nice.
That's how brutal these people were to her.
Nice.
They told her that she was adopted. I don't know when, at what point in her life. I know that she knew long before he killed her, but they told her what her name was. They knew more than they should have known because I think the social worker or somebody was talking in their ear about me. So anyway, what I found out was, and it was listed on the notification on the site, that she called herself Alexis or Alex. So she didn't even use the name that they gave her.
And just to throw the name out now, it's Bowman was the couple, and it was Brenda and Dennis Bowman who did, and we'll get into their past. And again, you let it slip, and God bless you, monsters, because it's not just a one-off. It's what the husband did over the period of his life. We'll get to that. He's killed more than one person and sexually assaulted a bunch more women, and his wife Brenda. And we can, I mean, that's for a whole nother documentary. Whether she knew what happened, whether she, I mean, people, wives, husbands have blinders. I'm not excusing her, but no one came up to her and said, until the end, said, you know what your husband did? Not only murdering your adopted child, but also these other horrible things that he did. And by the end of the documentary, it might have changed, but she, sort of was still with him, said, well, I love him, and I want to visit him.
She's still with him. She's not abandoned him.
When you find, and again, it's in again, I keep pointing to the documentary because I can't do justice to the wonderful scenes and the wonderful production values. It's a two-parter. You won't want to stop after the first part, and that you eventually, it might not be right now, so you can put it in the context, but you get into your RV and you start trucking. And you're trucking all over that's why I lost track of where you were living. Okay, now wait a minute. Where did they find? Now you're in Michigan. Now you're over here. But you went obviously to the state where she should be, or at least where you're going to start. When do you pick up like Carl Koppelman? Because he's another character that is marvelous.
Yes. Well,
God
Carl,
bless him.
I know. He's just he is a marvelous soul. He had picked. Have you ever heard of the website Web Sleuth?
Yeah, they're on my list of people to interview, and they keep not putting me off. Oh, about tomorrow, because I want to get both of the two leads on the web page. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So he was a moderator and also a sleuther on.
Okay. Yep. And an accountant, I believe.
Yes, he's a CPA. So anyway, he was taking care of his mom, who was quite elderly, and he had quit his job so he could be a full-time caretaker. So in the time that he wasn't, looking after his mom, he would do research on these Jane and John Does. And things triggered him, like cases that I don't remember the exact cases. One was J.C. Dugard, the little girl that was abducted up in...
I've seen on their website. I saw that one, yeah.
So that was, I think, the one that really set him full speed into it. He had been doing it. It was kind of novel, but I think once that happened, he sort of like really moved into serious trying to figure out who these people are and where they are. So anyway, there was a little girl in Racine, Wisconsin, who had been found alongside a cornfield. It's mentioned in the documentary. And Carl had gotten in touch with the police in Racine, Wisconsin, and said, this Jane Doe of yours looks like a girl who's been missing for 20 years. Like Alexis went missing, and I call her Alexis. Alexis went missing in 89, and this little girl who was the Jane Doe was found in 99. So she looked to be about 24 years old, and that fit how old Alexis would have been, and their features kind of lined up. But the one thing that told me this was not Racine Jane, and I knew it almost right away before the DNA was evaluated and all that, was her height. Racine Jane Doe was 5'8". My daughter was 5'6". No way she was not going to end up 5'8". So did Carl to a degree, because the ears didn't line up. You can line a lot of stuff up, but the ears have to line up too. So they didn't. And Carl's trying to stretch them or whatever. And they're having this debate on Web Sleuth on the Aundria Bowman thread, because there's a thread on there about her and in other places. But this debate between other sleuthers, that he was certain that it could possibly be Aundria Bowman after he did. You saw on the Netflix that he has that whole spreadsheet. Remember, he makes spreadsheets of missing. Okay, so Aundria Bowman showed up number 2 on the spreadsheet. So he gets in touch with Racine police, and he says this could be, your Jane Doe could be Aundria Bowman from Hamilton, Michigan. Now, if you look at a map and you look at the Michigan Lake, the Lake Michigan, Racine is right across the lake from Hamilton. You could draw a straight line to Hamilton. So, it's not that far. And it's, a possibility. So Racine got in touch with Hamilton police, Allegan police. And Allegan police put together a cold case team. 2 policemen, and they went to the Bowmans and they said, give us some DNA. We want to see if this, and they had nothing. The Bowmans had nothing with Alexis's, Aundria's DNA on it. So they went back to him after they couldn't find any DNA, and it was on an instrument that supposedly she used in a picture frame. I think they burned and tore up everything that might have had her DNA on it. But anyway, so they went back to him and they said, we can't get any DNA off of this. You need to, because by then they found out that she was adopted. You need to write a letter of permission to the Norfolk Human Services that handled the adoption and ask them to get in touch with the biological mother, Cathy. So that police officer, his name's Pat O'Reilly, went over, and Tracy Brickhouse was the social work he talked to, and told her that, the circumstances, and that they believed that the adoptive father might be involved. Now, she called me up, wouldn't tell me anything, but she told me where Alexis went missing from, and that the police officer said the biological father might be involved, which really just sort of set me reeling, because that told me something, that's pretty serious when a police officer will say that to a social worker, and the social worker will, so she was convinced of what he was saying, and he wasn't wrong.
And so Dennis, and maybe Brenda as well, absolutely know that the body found in Racine is not Alexis, because at least he knows where she is, and he knows he killed her, and he knows he buried her, and not Racine.
Right.
Now they then come to you and to get a swab and all that stuff.
Right.
Although, like you said, by that time you're saying go ahead to rule
Right.
this
Right.
body out. It's not going to be her.
I came back up to Gloucester and I gave my DNA up here, but then they lost it in the system, and so for 2.5 years I thought they'd cleared her. They hadn't.
And for those 2 years, I mean, you probably didn't stop looking but you were hopeful. You were pretty sure that she was still hopefully alive, but out there. And so after that, or even during that time, you're starting to gear up for, your search of the world.
Well, what I had done is after I got that information and came up here and gave my DNA, I realized, she was in junior high school. And somehow, somewhere, classmates came across on the internet and
Yeah.
it was probably just starting up at that time. I'm not really sure. But I had never picked up a computer before in my life and tried to do social media. So I was like in left field, lost. Okay. But somehow the whole classmates thing came across maybe the internet, whatever I was looking at, and it might have been Web Sleuth that I picked up on it. And I realized that high school kids go looking for each other.
Right.
I mean, that's a very big connection in your life. If you went to grammar school, junior high school, and high school with these
I'm still
people, right,
connected to some of them. Yeah.
right. So I said, well, I'll open a classmates account and I'll put her name out there and I'll ask people, if you know her, please come to this page. Well, in the meanwhile, Carl's on Web Sleuth talking to a woman named Very who told him or rather that she knew about the case and that she had gone to school with Aundria. Now they're talking separate. I don't know anything about what conversation they're having. And Carl says, well, there's like this, he tells Very, there's this classmates account. And that's not unusual that there would be a classmates account. But
Absolutely.
it was a premium account. In other words, I was paying for anybody who knew her to come leave a message so I could read it. So that really triggered Carl. He's like, why is this a premium account? Who's paying for this? If Aundria is missing or dead, who's paying for it? And he didn't know that I had appeared, he didn't know that the biological family, mother, I'd gone through all that the police had me give the DNA. He didn't know I set up the classmates. He didn't know any of that. So he tells Very, this is so convoluted. He tells Very on the Web Sleuth to get in touch with me on the classmates because she went to school with Aundria, right, Alexis. She knows her as Aundria. And Carl reasoned that if she started talking to me and telling me that, I would respond, or whoever had this classmates page would respond. And sure enough, I got the message. She told me she went to school with Alexis, that, there was somebody named Carl. I think she told me about Carl at that point. And that there was a thread at Web Sleuth. And I went over to Web Sleuth and I think I read the thread and I may have started making comments. And Carl can tell you better than I can, but he figured out that I was the biological mother and he got in touch with me. Long story short, he got in touch with me.
No, that's that's the convolution of social media, but at times it unbelievably pays off, and it did in this case.
Yes.
So he reached out to you then at that point.
He reached out to me, and I was kind of in flux. We were kind of in flux. We were going to buy a house down in Florida and just get out of this New England weather for the winter because I'm a Southerner. I was going nuts, and I just kind of went like, I can't go back to New England. I need to be in a new, different environment so I can focus just on this. Nothing that, I want it all new and different. And I always wanted to move to California. So I convinced my husband, let's buy a house in California. And away we went. But I spent that whole time out there Carl lived in California too. So now I'm not far from him. I'm living in a city not far from him. So we meet halfway in between. My husband and I go and meet him at a restaurant and I get to know Carl. And as I get to know him better, I'm like really intrigued by him. And he is really interested in this case. So we start flying from California to the missing in Michigan every May. And we did that like 4 times. And I went out there and ran into Brenda. And you see that in the documentary.
Yep.
And Brenda never said she cared anything about Aundria. She's never said she loved her. She made these little whiny remarks that we never stopped looking for. She's always in our heart. No. She was running interference for that monster.
Now, and just to give the audience when we get into what happened or what they say happened, is that Alexis was, and this is not disputed. Oh, she's a troublesome child. Well, for them, she was. She didn't do what, and we should also point out that they adopted her because they didn't have kids and couldn't have kids, and then boom, right after that, 4 years, they have their own child. So of course she becomes the castaway, the runt of the litter, and so
he started molesting her as a small child.
Yes.
As soon as she became a teenager, she started revolting, or she started doing what she should have done.
Fight back.
Yes. But Brenda was grooming her. What happened was he went to prison for trying to murder a teenage girl. So Brenda follows him up there. This is in the UP. She follows him up to the UP. Alexis is like 7 years old. So she takes Alexis out of all the environment that she knows and her grandparents and she hauls her up to live right next to that prison in a dungeon of an apartment. I went and looked at it. And Alexis is put on a bus every day to ride 10 miles to the elementary school she had to go to, while Brenda was like within walking distance to that prison front door so she could go. But not only that, she was giving my little child pornography to read. And then she would take Alexis as a 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old to that prison, set her down and berate her in front of that monster. So she was grooming her. She continued the grooming while he was in prison. And the book she was giving her had bestiality in it. And I know this because a woman who had gone to school with Alexis said Alexis showed up with one of those books and said her mama let her read it.
And again, we'll take it as we go along, that you eventually are talking to these friends. Again, it's in the documentary. They are being interviewed. The friends of hers, I guess relatives, when you say relatives, not blood relatives, but relatives by adoption. So these people, cousins, whatever. And so they knew her. Again, this comes from both Brenda. Brenda's not home, I guess, but the story when he's pinned to the wall several different times is that she ran away. She grabbed $100, which might have been true or not, $100 that were lying around, put that in a bag.
Now wait, I want to just here. I want
put it whatever way.
Clarify something. What happened is they originally said $100, and that did not trigger what they were looking for, and that was to charge her with a felony. So they changed their story and they said, oh no, it was $150. So the police signed a warrant out for my daughter for felony theft, and he was the victim.
But so the story forever not only is that she left, that she ran away, but he created the story of the $150, what she was wearing, and we'll find out later what happened to those clothes. But if you're looking for her, she's wearing a purple coat. That's all she had. She didn't have no other clothes on her back. Purple coat, and whatever she's wearing, jeans and whatever, had this red or purple bag, whatever, red bag, cloth bag, whatever, that would have had whatever, including the $150, would have had whatever she took, and off she goes. Right. And so that's his story at that time. But now you're back with Carl, not believing it. So you're going to go to, and you by then, you say went every May. At one point, by now you're starting to get more and more information. You're meeting with friends and relatives. When did you say, okay, it's him? When did that come rolling out?
What happened was I had found out from the policeman that came looking for me that he had a criminal background, and that the criminal background was that there was a girl riding her bicycle down the street. He was on a motorcycle. He rode past the girl, say, going south. Then he turned around and rode past her again and did it one more time, forced her off the road, pulled a gun out and said, get into the woods or I'm going to blow a hole through you. The girl escaped because a truck came driving up from behind him. She saw the truck. She threw her bike out in the middle of the street. I guess at that point she was off the bike, but he had shot at her twice and the bullets hit the ground and bounced off. Brave child that she didn't just run into the woods, run away from him. Any direction would have been good for him because he would have forced her into the woods. So anyway, she saw that truck coming up from behind him. She threw her bike out. The truck had to stop. she opened the door of the truck and jumped in. And by then he'd run off because he didn't want to be seen. But I think the person in the truck saw him. Anyway, she didn't live far from there. She had the person drive her straight to her parents' house. The parents called the police. The report was made. The police had nabbed him and had him pulled over to the side of the road. They sent a police car over to her mother's house. She and her mother got into the police car. They went to where they had him pulled over. They pointed at him. She said, "Yep, that's it. That's him." They never found the gun, but what they found on him was a great big knife. So he was not only going to shoot her, he was going to cut her up too. He's a violent monster. And I was finding out that Alexis had gone to her principal, her church, her friends, Brenda, and said, "He's molesting me violently." She even at one point went to the principal and said, "I don't want to go home. I'm afraid of what my parents will do to me."
And what's I can't even get my mind around, there's a reenactment in the documentary where she just goes to the principal alone to complain about her fears and that this is, she's being molested and she doesn't want to go home. Their procedure is to bring the parents in and maybe a social worker, I'm not sure, and she has to tell everyone what she's claiming. So, of course, being put on that, in that situation, she recants. So now she becomes a liar and someone who's, accusing her adopted father of molestation.
Okay, so when I found all this out and I started looking at Google Map, I knew I hired a PI, and the PI went in, built a nice bridge between me and the cops because I was so outraged, I would have burned it down, So into the fire, I was in the fire I was walking blazing, And so the PI, fortunately, got in between me and the cops, and he found out what kind of report they had. He got all the paperwork they had. And that's when I found out she was the suspect and he was the victim for 21 years. Nobody ever looked for my daughter. They never looked into it. He was on parole when he murdered. No, he was on bail when he murdered Kathleen Doyle. He was on parole when he murdered my daughter. So I found out he was on parole and that she had pleaded for her life, that he was molesting her, and what he was on parole for. And by 2013, I just said, he did this. And my PI and Carl and I were doing Zoom meetings, and it's recorded. I'm saying in 2013, I got a bad feeling she's in that backyard.
Now, again, they would just point out that they lived in this house, and you and Carl are running drones over the area. I love drones. Yes. And so you're looking along with Google Maps, you're looking at this little patch that you're convinced. Now, Help me understand this, remember it, and understand it. They ultimately, before the area is ultimately exhumed, he moves a couple of miles, 10 miles, whatever, down the road, but they leave whatever. I mean, that's correct, that this is their former house.
He murdered her in a farmhouse on right on the outskirts of Hamilton. It's like, Holland and Hamilton, just right so the house was like right on the line. So he murdered her in that house, hid her body in the shed in the back. Then he went and abducted Meta, and he panicked after Meta because she was a living witness. So he gets Brenda, and they were looking at this property anyway. They were going to buy this property that I flew the drone over, which was not where he killed her. But they were looking at that property, and he panics. They were supposed to move in, I think, after the new year, but he panics and moves them over there in November. And in the time that he moves Brenda and their child over there, he exhumes Alexis from a pigsty. He had buried her in an old pigsty in the shed. Now, the cops, all they had to do was look at this man's background and go look in the shed, and they would have found her. They didn't do any of that. I'm telling you, they dropped the ball.
Now we don't want to, because I have my list of things and we're
Oh,
covering
okay.
them all. But you did throw the name out there, and she's a fascinating person. Meta McLeod or McLeod
Yes. Yeah.
McLeod.
Wow. Meta got in touch with me on the Find Aundria M. Bowman page, sent me a private message in, I think it was 2014, that she believed that her abduction at 6 years old was somehow related to my daughter's case. And when Carl and I went back out to Michigan, because she's from, still lived in Michigan. She lives in Holland. Well, not quite Holland, but anyway, when we flew out there and we stayed at the hotel she managed, and I got to know her. And Carl and I, when we were there, drove the route from where she was abducted, and it went right past that farmhouse that he killed my daughter in, out to the park that was right around the corner from the house he moved into, and buried her in the backyard. So it was a comfortable place. It was it's a big, it's a farm. Michigan, and that part of Michigan is very rural, very farm rural. Okay. So this park was way out in the countryside and
Now,
not
just,
far from
just
him.
I just want to make sure I'm clear. And now, Meta, she was abducted. Was she assaulted, or just abducted and ran away? I mean,
no, she was lured into his truck. He drove 19 miles to that park from where he abducted her. Now, he abducted her off the road that he drove back and forth to work every day. So anyway, he abducted her, took her out to this park, drug her into the woods, stripped all her clothes off, was just about ready to, I think, sexually assault her, and they heard dogs out. He heard dogs out in the. Now, that triggered him because of what happened with the 1980 case, the teenager he shot at. He in his mind heard the dogs, and I believe thought about that truck that intercepted that abduction. Okay. So he went, oh my God, it's going to happen again. So he runs out to his truck and drives off in the direction of the house he lived in, the place he'd moved my daughter's body to. And Meta, poor little baby, had no clothes on, went running out in the middle of the street as a 6-year-old, screaming for anybody, please save me. And this woman came along and covered her up, put her in her car, I don't know if it was a truck or a car, but drove her to the nearest place where they could contact the police. And Meta did that same day, that poor traumatized little 6-year-old did a composite that you could not rule him out. But when I saw that composite, I had his mugshot at that point from that 1980 murder. Now, 9 years had passed, but not much had changed about him. I put that mugshot next to that composite. I said, that's it. And so it was little pieces of puzzles coming together all along, like things just clicking together. Strange.
let's talk a little bit about, because there's a great scene in the documentary where, again, after you're sitting through a documentary like this that's so detailed and it's so well cut, so you're with it, you're in it, and you're moving constantly. At one point, someone gets on the phone to you. You can tell me who. I think a friend, either a friend of yours or a direct friend of yours, or a friend of Alexis, who knew Alexis, and it's on the phone and says, "We got him.
That was Meta. That was Meta.
But it's not for the abduction of Alexis. So tell me what they ultimately got. And that's a whole, you talk about crazy, that he couldn't have been there, that he was there because he was in the Navy and they made him come.
Meta told me they got him. And I went they got him for Alexis in my head. They got him for Alexis. And then I think I found out, maybe they put out the press release a couple days later, but maybe I found out right before, because I was talking to a detective called Chris Haverdink every time I went out to Michigan. He was the guy on the cold case. So he would meet with me and he would just listen to me every time. So I think Chris Haverdink, I talked to him and he said, it's not for Alexis. There's going to be a news conference that comes out and they'll explain it. He didn't really want to go into it. And so I watched the news conference, and that's how I found out that it was for Kathleen Doyle. that they had arrested him for the murder of Kathleen Doyle. So it wasn't Alexis and my time yet. And I just sort of was going to find out what happened to Kathleen Doyle. Now, I lived in Norfolk, and he adopted my daughter in Norfolk, and Kathleen Doyle was murdered in Norfolk. He was supposed to be in court for that attempted murder of that 19-year-old girl. He skipped out. He didn't show up in court. He went to the reserve thing that he was signed up with the Navy. So when it was time for him to go to court, his parents put up their house to bail him out, and he didn't show up to court. They could have lost their house, but the judge, and it's in the transcripts, where is Dennis Bowman? And the lawyer says, oh, he had to go to Virginia for his 2-week reserve, so he can't be here. Now, that's an attempted murder. He's out on bail, and he skips the first, and they let it slide.
He didn't try to escape. I mean, in other words, if he was on trial for that attempted murder, and it's like, okay, well, I don't know why he did that, maybe just to clear his head. So he goes down there for 2 weeks, kills somebody, and then of course comes back for his court dates. But as I was saying, is the connection to Alexis is that there is all this DNA evidence left behind, but they can't do anything with it. They put it in CODIS, I think, or whatever that was there at that time, and they no match. No match. Right. So now that they think, okay, we got this guy, or we got this maybe connection, and we're now in the much later time when DNA is pretty good, they have an excuse, but there's a trick. They trick him. Tell the story of how they trick him to give up DNA.
Well, at the point that they get his DNA, they were losing it I think had told one of the police, either Haberding, I think they told Chris Haberding, that if I didn't leave them alone, they were going to charge me with harassment. And the police said, well, come on down. We'll talk to you about that. And they went on down. And it was like I pushed them into the arms of the people they feared the most. So when they got to the police department and it's in the documentary, how I'm the crazy woman he says it, I'm spreading lies and rumors, this crazy lady. Anyway, they said, you want a drink of water, Dennis? He goes, well, yeah, I'll have a drink of that water. And they scooped it up. Well, anyway, let me back up a little bit. My PI had said to me, he's a pretty savvy criminal if he's able to get away with your daughter being missing for 30 years. He wasn't savvy enough not to drink out of that cup, was he?
But he wasn't. He drank out of it.
Right. The police at that point suspected him because they had looked into his background, and they suspected him as much as I did. So it's not going to hurt them to have a DNA to either eliminate him or, and they probably even ran, his DNA on Racine Jane Doe, to see if they could find any DNA on her in case, So anyway, they sat on that DNA for a couple of years, and then the Kathleen Doyle case broke. And what had happened is the cold case team in Norfolk, Virginia, took her bedspread and tested the deposit on the bedspread and found that it matched a bunch of Bowmans in Michigan. And let me tell you, this is almost divine intervention here. This is where I say God has got his hands on this, or whatever God is. The detective that was on the cold case, not Chris Haberding, but a different one that was on Alexis's cold case, was at the same cold case conference as the detective who had the list of the Bowmans whose DNA might possibly be. Yeah, some portion, maybe 2 or 3 of them, had opened an ancestry page that captured that DNA. It was Dennis Bowman was second to the bottom, I think, and then 25 of his relatives, male relatives. But what the detective did was really smart, is instead of trying to sift through each person, he just went to the internet to see is there any of these people on the internet? Who are they? So he got to Dennis Bowman, and he saw the Find Aundria page and everything I posted about that monster's background. And he said, oh, let me back up just a little bit more. He took that list to the cold case detective that was at the conference in Virginia. The Virginia cold case guy went to the Michigan cold case guy and said, here's this list. Do you know any of these people? He said, I know Dennis Bowman, and that's probably your guy.
and off they go to get
Yes.
him, arrest him, and charge him with the murder
What they
of.
do is when that detective said that, he said, and we have his DNA. So you bring your DNA over and we'll test it with our DNA, and boom.
And shortly, or maybe not shortly, there's nothing shortly about this case. He was charged with the murder. I'm sorry, or is it Maureen or Kathleen?
Kathleen
Doyle. I misspoke on my notes. So Kathleen Doyle, and so he is charged with that murder.
Right.
And this gets a little confusing, but he's charged with that murder. Ultimately, he's going to be through various means and interviews, and there's some painful. I put it down here. I'm sure you're familiar with this phrase. The world's longest striptease is him. And now, who is that? That was a great guy who was giving him peanuts or pecans or whatever.
Oh, yeah. That was John Smith. He's the detective in Virginia, who said, he was on the cold case. He said, let's take this bedspread that's in the evidence, been sitting there for 40 years, and test it. Right. And he came up with a DNA profile. And they ran it through, I know what they did. They ran it through Parabon Labs, which is place that you match up DNA. Well, you do that reverse.
The fancy term, I believe, is investigative genetic genealogy, where you're searching public genetic databases to build family trees and identify suspects or victims via their biological relatives, which, of course, may be innocent of any crimes.
Those family trees, and then when they find that connection, they flip the family tree.
Yep.
And so that they figure out by flipping the family tree who's the last people on there. And I don't really understand it perfectly, but I get the gist of it. Yep. So they figured out that 30 people could have produced that DNA. And then he held on to that until that cold case conference came, and he went to the woman who was like organizing it and said, I've got this DNA, and all these people come from Michigan. And she says, well, there's a detective over there who's from Michigan working on a cold case team. Divine intervention. That's all I can say.
Right.
So that's how they figured out Dennis Bowman was responsible for the 1980 murder of Kathleen Doyle.
And as we pointed out earlier, and keep pointing out, that did not shake Brenda. Whether she even believed it or not doesn't matter. She, stood by her man. She was, doing Tammy
Use
Wynette.
The Bible to justify it.
There you go. How did that work? I forgot.
She quoted, I think it was Philippians, okay. And my husband knows, but it's 2 Bible passages that
she quoted.
One says, you can't take anything from me and my God will protect me.
Yeah, and she stayed with him. So when we're again speeding through the documentary, when do they've got him on that, and he's going to stand trial for that. So all these interviews, he's in prison garb, so he's not bailed and whatever.
So what happened is they arrested him in Michigan for the Kathleen Doyle murder. So while he was in Michigan, we started working on him about Alexis. Sure. Detective Chris Haverdink called me up, and I think this was like 2 weeks into them trying to get it out of him. Oh, I know what happened. He admitted to killing Alexis on a telephone call to Brenda, and the police captured it. And they told Brenda that he owes you telling you where he buried Aundria's body. But before they said that to her, they called me up. Chris Haverdink called me up, and he said, the DA is going to charge without a body. He has admitted to this, and he won't admit to where he hid her body. I said, Chris, you tell him that he can stay in Michigan and serve his time for the murder of Kathleen Doyle, and he will tell you where he buried Alexis. And that's what they did. They fooled him and Brenda into giving up what he did with Alexis's body. Now, Chris Haverdink told me that the DA was going to charge without a body, but after he got off the phone with me, they called up Brenda and said they were going to, what was it? They were going to charge, he told me they were going to charge without a body, but they told Brenda that they were going to have to give up he was going to have to give up where he hid Alexis's body, or he wasn't going to be able to stay in Michigan. If he gave up where he hid Alexis's body, he could stay in Michigan and they could have visits.
Now, again, that you've done it very concisely. That's why I got confused. I had to roll the tape back while they're doing it because he's in different color, and he's in orange, he's in whatever. Now, the murders now these are state cases, not federal. So the murders in Virginia, he gets picked up in Michigan for a murder and whatever. But before they may be discussing extraditing him to Virginia for that murder, because that's the one they have a body for. They have everything they need, and he's in Michigan. So throughout this, Virginia is very happy to cooperate. And then there is a scene which is, I can't even imagine. Dennis says he's going. Well, I don't know what he says. He eventually confesses the whole story, which he makes up, of course, how he killed Alexis, but he wants Brenda there. So you can't, where he was, you couldn't have not conjugal, but face-to-face visits. So in the room, a regular kind of with a couch and that, she's got her back to the camera. But she's in the frame. You can see her, all about her. There are probably police and lawyers all over the place. And he's on the couch and he's talking to Brenda. And he gives, do you want to now go into the his story of what he thinks he did, or tells what he did to kill her. And what we all know he really did. So as he's sitting there, what does he tell Brenda happened?
Well, he tells Brenda that I'm really ashamed of what I did. Aundria is buried in the backyard. And Brenda says, we didn't live there then. He said, Brenda, she's buried in the backyard. She's always been there. So Brenda says, well, how did you kill her? More or less. I don't have it exactly in my head what happened in that scene. But he told her, in order to get Aundria's body into the barrel, I had to cut her legs off. But he didn't cut her legs off. He chopped her all up. They found her in 4 different bags in that barrel with her little sister, Vanessa, her little sister's dirty diapers on top of her, and a peppermint patty dated 1989, a peppermint patty wrapper dated 1989. So they knew she'd been in that barrel since 1989.
And he points out, of course, because he tries to say that, she swung at him or he slapped her. She was at the top of the stairs. She fell down and broke her neck. That's probably all true, that she was at the base of the stairs. But, of course, he pushed her. That's
I think he picked her up over his head. I think he picked her up over his head and threw her down those stairs.
Okay. All right. But what he did then was and that's, again, $150. He lost that. He took her bag. At that point, he didn't know the money was in it. He took her bag and her coat and burned them. So they were gone. That's why she would have taken them. And so they're not like in a closet somewhere. I've seen too many of these mysteries where look, it's her coat. It's here all the time. He was smart enough. Rather than bury it, I'm going to burn it. It's burnable. So I'm combustible. So I'm going to burn these things. And the only thing left is her body. And as you said, he wanted, and it was, I had to point out, I told this to my wife. She said, well, why when they exhumed, why couldn't they see the barrel? Well, the barrel was one of those cardboard ones. Right. Not metal. So the only thing, they have metal rims, but and you're talking 20 years with it, it's in the ground, decomposing both the body and the barrel. So at that point, when he says that, but up to that point, correct me if I'm wrong, there has been no investigation with X-rays or anything.
No, they did. They when they went in to collect what they could find of Kathleen Doyle's belongings, and I don't think they found anything, but they found what caused the burns on her face and a couple other things I don't right off the top of my head remember. But they went in with a dog and ground penetrating radar, but they didn't go back far enough. See, initially I thought she was buried closer to the house, and then something happened to convince me I was wrong. What happened was Carl and I went out to the Missing in Michigan, and I had met a bunch of women that lived in Hamilton that knew of the case and, kind of knew about what was going on and definitely knew about me looking for her. So anyway, one of the women called me up at Metta's Hotel and said, Cathy, I just drove by his place, and there is a shed in the back with no windows. And I knew there was a shed on the side of the house, but I didn't know about the shed in the back of the house. I told Carl, get in the car. We're driving over there. So we drive over there, and I see a brand new shed in the backyard, further back from where I had suspected he had buried her at first. That's when I went, he's built that thing because he's going to dig her up and take her body out of that backyard. And I called Chris Haverdink and I said, get out there. He's going to dig her up. And it took Chris 2 weeks to get out there. Well, by the time he got out there, he had pulled that building apart, shed apart, because I was online saying, you start digging, we're watching. I see that shed in the backyard, Dennis. And he was reading everything I was writing. So he didn't exhume her because he thought I was watching him.
This was, again, we've a little out of order. So this was obviously before he was arrested for the Virginia.
Yes.
So he was still in his house and watching out for what you were up to. Now, when you said you saw the shed, was this another one of the drone necessities, or were you able to see it from the road?
We just drove by, and I had landscaped that. I knew every building on that house. He had a building on the side of it that had windows of where they parked their car. I'd driven by that house enough times to know there was nothing in that backyard. And then suddenly there's a shed right in the backyard, and there were no windows in it. And that's what triggered the woman who saw it. She says, it's a shed with no windows in it. Is he going to go abduct somebody and put him back there? I said, no, he's going to dig my daughter's body up. That's what he built that for. So as soon as I got to a computer, I started saying, Dennis Bowman, don't you dig her body up. I'm watching you. I know you got that shed back there. So I called up Chris Haverdink.
Before he was arrested for the Virginia murder, he didn't get a chance to do it, did he?
No, he didn't.
So
because I put my foot right in the middle of it.
I do want to then again share with my audience, and you do you're very honest on the. That's why I feel comfortable asking you these questions. So when the exhumation starts, and of course they're in there with the little toothbrushes and everything, because they've got to be so careful. And it's clear that it's your dear daughter in that hole. What's going on?
Well, I think some degree of shock, of course, that would have happened to her. That how did I know that? How, there was a lot of that. Like, how did this actually be, come to be? And I just kind of let it flow over me. I just took it in. I had gone through so many emotions that at that point, it gave me some clarity. It gave me some, I was right. This really did happen this way. And I was also sort of like, how could I have known that? Because Carl and I discussed it. What happened was we went over to where he murdered her at, and they had torn the house down. And we met the people who bought that property, and they had turned the shed where he put her body into a fruit stand. And when I was there, I just got this feeling she's not on this property. She's buried behind his house. So, it took me a few years to just sum it all up in my brain. So then when it played out, I went it's kind of like a conclusion. The trial hasn't happened yet, but at least I've got, she's out of the ground. They got her out of the ground. So there was a relief, but there was also sort of just a disbelief, and there was shock, and I was horrified. He buried my little girl after chopping her up with diapers and her little sister's diapers. And Alexis didn't run away because she was afraid for that little girl. She was afraid for Brenda's biological child. So that's why she didn't take off.
And there is one, we're coming to the end of the story now. There is one, I put it down here as final insult. And the final insult is, of course, tell the how the ashes, how that thing finished.
And at the end of all of this, Brenda and Dennis Bowman are still considered my daughter's next of kin. So they gave her remains back to them. And then Brenda had her cremated, split the ashes, gave me half. And you heard her on the documentary. Judge won't do anything because I shared. It's just sick. These are sick people. Sick people. Demons.
So again, keeping sure. So Dennis was obviously, I think, either convicted or pled guilty, whatever, to both murders.
Right.
But they didn't. He ended up having to go to Virginia.
Right.
They didn't cut
Right.
that
He
slack.
only admitted to Alexis where Alexis was buried because he was convinced he was going to be able to stay in Michigan. Well, they did his court sentencing, and I was there for the sentencing. As soon as he walked out of that court, they put him on an airplane and sent him back to Virginia.
And he's now obviously that finished adjudication, and so he's housed in Virginia, correct, in a prison in Virginia.
Yes,
and,
Buckingham Prison Correctional Center. He should be on death row. Virginia has death penalty.
That I think it was from the documentary, and it perfectly describes you. Pitbull with lipstick.
Yeah, probably.
If anyone has any doubts, once again, Into the Fire is the documentary. And I'll cut this out if it's not public knowledge, but you told me earlier that there's probably going to be a movie with actor types. And this is, I think, for many reasons, it's an emotional story, but it's also a story of and I've done several of these where the parents or the mother or the spouse don't give up, and they either find the murderer, the body, or both. Yeah. And we need these stories because the whole concept of justice, where we also say, they can be out and doing it again. And he had a history of it. But even if it's a one-off for someone, they must be held accountable. So that's going to be that story. So it's going to make a great movie. I'm
writing a book.
That's why there's no book on this, right? Or did you say
not yet. It should be out by the beginning of next year.
Excellent. That will be, again, because I like reading things too, because you can flip back. And wait a minute, I can fast forward, of course, but it's like or go back. Wait a minute, who are they? Who's Meta? But I got to go. But it's in a book, and I'm getting older, so it's like, I got to go back and find it. So it's there. So again, I just want to say that this is an incredible story, and as I say, it's on Netflix. The documentary. So for most people, it's free. Everyone has Netflix. I don't have Hulu and Apple and HBO. It's too expensive. I got Netflix and my home service. That's it. So it's Netflix. You can get it, watch it, and you are amazing in it. The people they interview. I'm assuming you still have some contact with some of her friends and cousins and whatnot that Alexis grew up with. And so that you've obviously, and you also, we have to point out, you can point this out yourself, but you are continuing. This story doesn't necessarily have an end, but you found your daughter. You are still in advocacy. Is that correct? I mean, you're still out there on various.
I have a website.
Please give us that. Give us that.
The website is alexislaw.org. And it is, I want Brenda to, I want my daughter's ashes. How dare her do that? But what the website is, and what I'm going to be trying to do, is change the adoption laws. Closed adoption should not be allowed.
No.
This child would be alive if she could have found me, and closed adoption kept that from happening.
Well, once again, I want to thank Cathy, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Okay, good. Great. Good talking to you, Jim.
So I'd like to thank you folks for kindly tuning in for another episode of Murder Most Foul. If you liked what you heard, I hope you'll tell your friends. Information about the podcast and an email link that can get a message to me can be found at the podcast's website, the address being www.murdermostfoul.com. murdermostfoul, all one word, no caps, no spaces.com. So, until we meet again, stay safe, and for God's sakes, don't murder anyone.